The sun beat down hard on the cracked earth of Dust Hollow, the kind of prairie town where even hope felt dried up. A few sagging buildings lined the main street, barely standing, barely useful. The wind dragged grit across the boards of the bay. General Store's front porch, where a slouched man whittled wood without purpose and children with dusty cheeks played silently in the shadows. Eli Thompson rode in slow, his horse more bone than muscle after the last 2 weeks on the trail. He wasn't here for anything but a few supplies, salt, beans, maybe coffee if he had the coin. He wasn't looking for trouble. And he sure wasn't looking for anyone. But as he guided his horse toward the post to tie off, a voice stopped him. "Will, you take us home, sir?" The voice was small, soft, a child's voice, but not the kind with laughter in it. It came from a little girl, no older than 6, barefoot and wearing a dress 2 sizes too big. Her tangled hair framed a face too solemn for someone her age. She held a baby, no more than a year old, cradled in her arms with practiced care. Eli blinked, unsure he'd heard right. He looked down at her, then followed her eyes past her to the woman standing in the shadow of the general store's porch. She was thin, but not weak, wrapped in a worn shawl that did little to hide the hollowness of her cheeks or the sharpness of her collarbone. Her hair was a dull chestnut, pulled back in a way that suggested it used to be tidy once. Her hands were clasped at her front, knuckles white, and though she looked at Eli, she didn't speak. Her eyes told him everything. "Don't make this." Harder. The girl repeated herself. "Will you take us home?" Eli didn't answer. His first instinct was to turn away. He wasn't the kind of man who picked up strays, especially not ones that came with stories. He could already feel the eyes of the town on him. Men peering over the tops of whiskey glasses, women pretending not to notice. No one moved. No one offered help. They were watching to see what he'd do. The woman stepped forward and gently touched the girl's shoulder. "Letty," she whispered, "don't bother the man." "But he's got a good horse, Mama," the girl said. "And good boots." She looked up again. "You could take us anywhere." Eli looked down at his scuffed boots and felt something odd, like a crack forming in something he'd sealed shut long ago. He cleared his throat. "Where's your husband?" The woman flinched like he'd struck her. "Dead," she said plainly. "And your folks?" "Don't have any." Eli nodded once. He didn't ask more. He knew that tone, that edge. It was survival wrapped in pride. She had just enough strength left not to beg, but only barely. The baby stirred in the girl's arms, coughing once, a raspy little wheeze that made Eli's jaw tighten. He swung his leg off the saddle and walked past them into the store. He returned. A few minutes later, his saddlebags bulging with what he could afford dried meat, hard bread, powdered milk, and a jar of honey. He didn't say anything, just set it on the crate beside them and turned back toward his horse. "Why'd you do that?" the girl asked. He shrugged. "Can't eat pride." The woman met his eyes. This time, there was something different there. Not gratitude exactly, but a shift. A recognition. "My name's Clara," she said. "Eli," he answered. He tipped his hat and mounted again. "Town's no place to stay long," he said, mostly to himself. "Not for folks like you." He rode away before she could reply. But as he passed the last building, he looked back once. The little girl was still watching him, holding her baby brother like a soldier guarding the only thing that mattered. And Clara was looking too, not with hope, not yet, but with something close. Eli rode on, but something in him had changed. He'd come for beans and coffee. He was leaving with a name burned into his mind and the image of a girl brave enough to ask a stranger for home. Dust Hollow had a way of swallowing people whole. It didn't do it loud. It did it slow, quiet, like a fire that never quite burned but always smoldered. Folks came through town and didn't leave not because they liked it, but because they had nowhere else to go. That's where Clara was. No one knew her last name. No one asked. She'd shown up on foot 2 weeks before, clutching her infant son, and dragging along her daughter, Letty. Her boots were worn through, her shawl was torn. The baby wheezed in the cold night air, and Letty had a bruise on her knee that was already going yellow. She'd slept behind the livery stable the first few nights, curled between hay bales, half hidden from the street. After that, she'd found a crate in front of the general store and sat there during the day, asking nothing, saying even less. The storekeeper, Mr. Polk, sometimes left out stale bread that just went bad. A few kind souls gave her leftover stew or a bit of jerky. Others only stared or muttered about fallen women and drifters. No one offered help, because in Dust Hollow, everyone was too close to falling themselves, and then that man had ridden in, Eli Thompson, the cowboy. He was a quiet one, all dust and bone, with a stare like hard granite. Didn't smile, didn't linger. But he'd looked at her that day like she was someone instead of a burden or a mistake. Clara hadn't meant for Letty to speak up like that. "Will you take us home?" It had broken something open in her. Shame burned in her cheeks that day, hotter than the sun. But Eli hadn't scolded. He hadn't turned away in disgust like other men might have. He bought food, good food, and he hadn't asked for anything in return. Now, days later, Clara still sat on the porch, Letty at her side, the baby wrapped against her chest. The food had run out. She was hoping Mr. Polk might take pity again. Inside, she could hear the clink of glass, the rustle of shelves. Her stomach knotted with hunger, but she stayed put. She wouldn't beg. 2 men leaned against the hitching post, eyeing her openly. "Shame," one of them said. "She was probably real pretty once." "Might still be," the other replied, "if she smiled more or worked a bit for her keep." They chuckled. Low and mean. Clara kept her face still, staring ahead. If she flinched, they'd smell weakness. If she spoke, they'd twist it. And if she cried, she wouldn't cry. She felt Letty lean into her side. The girl had learned fast, too. Learned how to sit still. How to disappear even when in plain sight. Suddenly, the saloon doors creaked open. Sheriff Dent walked out, tugging on his belt. He glanced at Clara, then away again. No nod, no greeting, just silence. Clara knew why. She'd heard the whispers. She came from Kansas, ran off from some preacher. "No, I heard she was part of a traveling tent revival and ran off with the wrong man. Maybe she's a runaway slave's daughter. Looks like trouble, anyway." Whatever they guessed, they all agreed on one thing: she didn't belong. She was the kind of woman men wanted to use or feared, the kind of woman women avoided. And without a man to claim her, protect her, or explain her, she was no one, which was how Clara preferred it. No name, no history, no mistakes to dig up, but still. Her thoughts kept returning to the cowboy. That night, long after the town had gone quiet, Letty stirred on her blanket and whispered, "Mama? Yes, baby? That man. Do you think he'll come back?" Clara closed her eyes. She hadn't let herself think that. Hope was dangerous. It got people killed or broken or worse. But still, he might, she said softly. Letty smiled and curled tighter into her blanket. Clara stayed awake, listening to the wind whistle through the slats of the alley. In her arms, the baby wheezed softly. In her chest, something flickered. She hadn't felt in months. Not love. Not yet. Just the faintest echo of being seen. And in Dust Hollow, that was more dangerous and more precious than gold. L.A. hadn't meant to come back. He'd spent 3 days on the edge of town, working a busted fence on a rented patch of land no one cared about. The cattle had wandered weeks ago. The soil was too dry. But the solitude suited him until now, because Ever since he'd ridden away from the general store, he hadn't been able to shake the image of the little girl asking if he'd take them home. The way her arms cradled that baby like she'd done it 1,000 times. The way the woman Clara stood. Behind her, silent, proud, and starving, Eli had known hunger. He'd known what it was to want to disappear. That was why her eyes had stuck with him. They reminded him of his mother's right before she'd vanished into her grave, too tired to speak, too proud to beg. On the third morning, Eli loaded up his saddlebag again. He told himself it was just another trip to town for feed. Maybe some salt, a bolt of cloth for stitching. Practical things. But when he tied up his horse outside the general store and saw Clara still sitting in the same spot, that excuse vanished like dust in wind. She hadn't left. She still had the same shawl around her shoulders. Letty was holding the baby again, singing to him in a soft hum, like a lullaby she'd made up. The baby's cough was worse, harsher, ragged. Clara looked thinner. Eli stepped inside the store. Mr. Polk gave him a sideways glance but said nothing, just started wrapping up coffee beans in a small sack. Add flour, Eli said, and salt, and 2 jars of preserves. You got honey? Costs more. I didn't ask the price. Mr. Polk blinked, then grabbed it off the shelf. When Eli stepped back onto the porch, Clara looked up, her face unreadable. The little girl gasped when she saw the food, but Clara held her back with one arm. Eli placed the goods down on the same crate as last time. Should hold you a few days, he said quietly. Clara didn't touch the food. Why? He met her eyes. Because you've got a child with a cough and a girl who hasn't eaten properly in days. That's not what I asked. Eli glanced toward the 2 men loitering across the street, the ones who had been watching her earlier. One of them spat. The other one grinned. I don't like the way folks are looking at you, he said. You don't owe me anything. Clara's jaw tightened. I didn't think I did. Good, she hesitated. Then, like she'd finally decided the price was fair, she knelt beside the crate and started packing the food into her sack. Letty helped, eyes wide with excitement. Are you always like this? Clara asked without looking up. Eli frowned. Like what? Half kind, half silent. I'm not kind, he said. I just know what a dying look looks like. Clara froze, her hand stilled on the sack. She looked up at him. This time really looked. Her eyes were dark and sharp, not pleading, not grateful. Just seeing him in return. That baby needs more than crackers and prayer, he said quietly. So do you. And what do you need, Mr. Thompson? She asked. He wasn't sure if it was sarcasm or curiosity, but it hit him anyway. He looked away. I needed beans, he muttered. Clara smiled barely, just a twitch of the mouth butt. It was the first warmth he'd seen from her. She stood, shifted the baby on her hip, and gave him a slow nod. Thank you, she said at last. He tipped his hat. Keep your head down. This town doesn't offer much. No, she said. But it sure seems to watch everything. As Eli mounted his horse, Letty called after him. You're going to come back again, right? He paused, one boot in the stirrup. Clara didn't answer. She just stood there, holding her children, the wind lifting her shawl like wings. Eli didn't answer either. But as he rode away, he knew the truth. He would be back, not because he had to, because he could not. The storm rolled in just past. Midnight. It came fast, ripping across the prairie like a train with no brakes. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled Eli's window panes, and the rain hit the roof of his cabin in sheets, drumming like war. He sat in his rocking chair, one boot off, staring at the flames in his hearth, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking of a little girl with big eyes, a sick baby, and a woman too proud to beg, but too thin to stand much longer. He tried to shake it off. Told himself she'd find shelter. Someone would take her in. Someone always did, right? But deep down, He knew Dust Hollow better than that. By morning, the rain had turned to mist, but the wind had teeth. Eli saddled his horse with an urgency he didn't bother hiding from himself. He rode back into town fast, boots wet, jaw tight, eyes scanning every shadowed alley, every sagging porch. They weren't in their usual spot. His stomach clenched. He dismounted and stomped into the general store, dripping water onto the floorboards. Mr. Polk looked up. They didn't come in today, the shopkeeper said, like he already knew what Eli was going to ask. Saw him headed toward the livery yesterday evening before the rain hit. Eli turned on his heel without another word. He found them behind the livery stable, curled between stacks of hay beneath a broken awning. The ground was soaked. Baby was coughing again, loud and wet, a sound that made Eli wince. Clara had used her shawl to cover both children. She was soaked to the skin. Her lips were pale. Letty looked up and blinked, not even surprised to see him. "Hi, Mr. Thompson," she whispered hoarsely. "We tried not to get wet." Clara stirred, her face drawn, her body trembling from the cold. But her eyes still had fight. "We're fine," she rasped. Eli dismounted, tossed the reins, and walked right over. "No," he said simply. "You're not." She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but then her knees buckled. Eli caught her before she hit the ground. "I said we're fine," she insisted, breath ragged. "You don't even believe that," he said. He looked at Letty. "You trust me?" The little girl nodded. He gently pried the baby from Clara's arms and handed him to the girl. "Hold him tight. You ride with me." She blinked, stunned, but didn't ask questions. The cabin wasn't big, but it was dry and warm. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the hearth inside roared like a promise. Eli led the horse to the barn first, then carried Clara inside. She didn't weigh much more than a sack of flour. Letty followed, still clutching the baby as if the wind might steal him. He laid Clara on the cot in the corner, covered her in a wool blanket, and stoked the fire higher. She was barely conscious, her lips murmuring names, none of which he recognized. "She be okay?" Letty asked, voice trembling. Eli knelt beside the fireplace. "She will, but she needs rest. And food." He poured warm milk into a cup and gave it to Letty. She fed the baby first, with gentle hands and steady care. Eli watched her, something hard in his throat. No child should know how to survive like that. No child should carry that much. He cooked eggs and potatoes. When Clara stirred, he brought a plate to her. She didn't speak, just ate slowly, quietly, like she hadn't tasted real food in weeks. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered finally, her voice ragged. "No," Eli said. "But I did." She looked at him, studying his face like she didn't know what to make of it. "This isn't pity?" she asked. He shook his head. "Pity gets you a coin and a cup. What I'm giving you is shelter. And tomorrow? Tomorrow's not promised, but you'll be here, alive, dry, safe." She blinked hard, but didn't cry. "I don't stay where I'm not wanted," she said, almost as a warning. "You're wanted," he said without hesitation. "Your children are too." That silenced her. Later, after the storm cleared and night fell again, Clara lay in the cot with the baby against her chest. Letty curled up by the fire on a quilt Eli's mother once made. She sighed in her sleep soft. Content. Eli sat in his rocking chair, watching the flames, the storm forgotten. Outside, Dust Hollow still whispered. Inside, for the first time in a long while, it was quiet. Not lonely. Just quiet. The wind had settled, and the land lay hushed beneath a gray dawn. Inside the cabin, the world felt even quieter, like it was holding its breath. The fire had burned low, casting the room in soft amber light that flickered across wood walls. And sleeping forms. Clara lay still, eyes open, listening to her baby's breath rise and fall against her chest. It was steadier this morning, not perfect, but better. The warmth of the cabin, the milk, and the steady shelter had done more than a week on the streets of Dust Hollow ever could. Across the room, Letty was curled beneath a thick quilt on a sheepskin mat, one hand tucked under her cheek. She hadn't stirred all night, and Eli, he was sitting exactly where she remembered last seeing him, rocking gently in a creaking wooden chair, boots planted firm, hat pulled low over his brow. He hadn't said a word since bringing them in, not one unnecessary syllable. He'd moved. Like a man who was used to being alone and didn't mind it. That made Clara nervous. She knew what it meant when a man was quiet. Some were holding back cruelty. Some were hiding weakness. Others were drowning in memory. Eli didn't seem cruel, not yet. But he was too guarded to be comfortable. She shifted and sat up slowly, the baby still cradled in her arms. "You slept?" he asked without looking up. "For a few hours," she said. "You needed it." A pause. Silence again. Clara stood carefully, her legs shaky, and moved toward the fire. She lowered herself beside it and rubbed her hands together, warming her fingers before wrapping them around a tin mug Eli offered Dot. It was coffee. Not strong, but hot. She hadn't had a proper cup in a long, long time. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He only nodded. "You always this talkative?" she asked, a touch of dry humor in her voice. Eli cracked the faintest smile. "More." "When I'm drunk?" She arched a brow. "You drink much?" "Not anymore." Silence again. Clara stared into the fire, then finally said what had been on her mind since last night. "I don't know how long we'll stay." "That's up to you. I don't want to be a burden." Eli's voice was steady. "You're not. You don't know me." "I know enough." She turned to him, expression guarded. "What do you think you know?" He didn't answer right away. He reached down and tossed another log onto the fire, the sparks snapping as they caught. "I know a woman doesn't sleep on the ground with 2 children unless she's run out of choices," he said. "I know a child doesn't ask a stranger to take her home unless she's desperate. And I know the look of someone who's lost things they ain't ready to talk about." Clara looked down at her baby, blinking fast. "That's not all I am," she said softly. "I never said it was." They sat like that for a while. No words. Just the fire crackling and the wind whispering outside. When Letty finally stirred, she sat up grudgingly, rubbed her eyes, and whispered, "Is this our house now?" Clara started to speak, to gently correct her, but Eli beat her to it. "It's a safe place," he said. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like." Letty blinked, then smiled. It was the first real smile Clara had seen on her daughter's face in weeks. Clara's heart ached. Later that morning, Eli went about his chores, chopping firewood, checking the horses, mending a fence. Clara watched him from the window as she fed the baby. He didn't talk much. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer promises, but he moved like a man who could be counted on. The silence in the cabin had shifted. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something else. Something still and steady. A kind of peace Clara had almost forgotten existed. She didn't trust it. Not fully. But for now, she allowed herself to rest her head against the wall, let her baby sleep and close her eyes just for a moment. And in that moment, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like the first breath of a new beginning. It was a Tuesday when the past came looking. The sky was clear, sun high, birds chirping like they had no idea anything dark had ever happened in the world. Clara was out near the small garden plot, with Letty teaching her how to dig straight rows for beans. The baby was bundled in a basket in the shade, sleeping soundly. The scent of fresh soil mixed with pine and wood smoke, and for the first time in what felt like years, Clara allowed herself to hum. Eli was working the fence on the north side of the property. He'd built it stronger this time, like he meant to keep something out, or someone in. Clara was just brushing dirt off her hands when the dog barked just once, then twice. Then a low rolling growl that chilled her to the bone. Eli came around. The corner fast, his rifle in hand, boots heavy on the porch. He didn't say a word, just scanned the path. Leading from the woods, Clara followed his gaze. A man was riding up slow on a tall black horse, long coat flapping in the breeze, face hidden beneath a wide hat. But Clara didn't need to see his face. She knew the way he sat the saddle, the way his boots clicked when they hit the ground. His name was Rafe Mercer, and he was the reason she ran. "Clara," Rafe called out like they were old friends. "Been a long ride, sweetheart." Eli stepped in front of her before she could move, body squared like a wall. The man dismounted casually, wiping dust from his gloves. "Didn't mean to scare anyone. Just came to collect what's mine." "She's not yours," Eli said flatly. "Rafe's." Smile didn't reach his eyes. "She was. Paid a fair sum too?" "Reverend said so himself. Now I ain't here to cause trouble, I just want the woman. And the boy. She's got something that belongs to me." Clara's heart pounded. She felt Letty cling to her side, trembling. Her son let out a small, frightened cry from the basket. "Don't belong to anyone," Clara said, her voice steady despite her fear. "You never owned me. You bought a lie," Rafe laughed coldly. "That's not how the law sees it. Contracts were signed. Preacher got paid. You were supposed to be my wife. You wanted a servant. Or worse," he shrugged. "Details." Eli shifted, his hand tightening on the rifle. "You've got 5 seconds to ride out of here. I don't think you want to start something, cowboy. I've got friends. Lawman." Eli didn't flinch. "Then bring them. But you step 1 foot closer to her or those kids, and I swear to God, the rifle wasn't just for show." The way Eli held it calm, steady said everything. He wasn't making a threat. He was promising an end. Rafe narrowed his eyes, the mask of charm slipping. For the first time, he looked unsure. He hadn't expected Clara to have protection. "Certainly not a man like Eli. You'll regret this," Rafe said finally. "Women like her, they always bring trouble." Eli took a slow step forward. "You've got 3 seconds now." Rafe hesitated, then spat into the dirt. He turned, mounted, and rode off with a curse tossed over his shoulder. But Clara knew this wasn't over. Eli lowered the rifle once the man disappeared over the ridge. He didn't speak. He just turned to Clara, eyes calm but serious. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, clutching Letty's hand tightly. "That man," Eli said, "he part of a church?" She nodded again. "The kind that makes women property. They called it marriage, but it was closer to prison." "Did he hurt you?" Clara paused. "Not with fists. But he owned everything I touched. Even my name. And when I ran, I knew he'd come eventually." Eli studied her. "He won't take you. Not while I'm here." Clara looked up at him, unsure of how to respond. The weight of his words sank in not just protection, but commitment. He wasn't running. She swallowed the knot in her throat. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," he said. "This won't be the last time we see him." "No," she agreed, "but next time I'll be ready too." That night, she slept with her son in one arm and a knife under her pillow. But she also slept beneath a roof, with a man who hadn't walked away when it got dangerous. And for the pee. First time, Clara realized maybe she wasn't running anymore. Maybe she was standing her ground. The next morning, Clara didn't move from the porch. She sat there silent, watching the horizon like a hawk. Her hands were wrapped tight around a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, but her eyes were sharp and cold. Eli worked nearby splitting wood, checking the barn, fixing a loose latch on the chicken coop, but his attention never strayed far from her. Neither of them spoke much, not at first. But the quiet wasn't empty this time. It was heavy with a question neither wanted to ask out loud. What happens now? By mid-afternoon, Letty was playing near the creek with a carved wooden horse Eli had made her. The baby napped in a crate lined with blankets near the fire. Clara stood by the fence, watching Eli as he finished repairing a busted post. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're thinking about leaving." She didn't deny it. "He'll be back," she said flatly. "Maybe." "Not maybe," she said, turning to face him. "He will come, and next time he might not ride alone." Eli nodded. "Then we'll be ready." Clara laughed bitterly. "We? Don't tie yourself to me, Eli. I'm not yours. I'm not even sure I belong anywhere anymore." Eli leaned his weight on the post. "That man thinks people are things to buy and use. If you run, he wins. If you stay, you take your life back. And risk yours in the process? I've faced worse." Clara crossed her arms. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet a long time. Then, "Because I know what it's like to watch someone you care about disappear and know you did." "Nothing." Clara's brow furrowed. "Your family?" "My sister," he said, voice low. "Same story, different man. I was too slow then. I won't be again." She stepped closer, arms still crossed, her voice softer now. "So I'm a second chance for you?" "No," he said. "You're you. But don't think for a second I'd let him take you without a fight." Clara looked down, blinking fast. "I've been on my own for a long time, Eli. Even when I wasn't. I know. I don't know how to be anything else. You don't have to," he said. "Not all at once." That evening she packed. Quietly. Just a small sack, diapers, rags, a piece of jerky, a bit of flour wrapped in cloth. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the road. Eli saw it the moment he stepped through the door. "You're leaving?" "I have to." "No," he said, voice calm but firm. "You're choosing to." Clara looked at him, hands shaking slightly. "You don't understand. I understand more than you think. But I'm not going to stop you, Clara. You want to leave? You walk out that door. No shame, no judgment. But if you stay, if you choose to stay, then that won't get within a mile of you again." She stared at the floor for a long time. "I don't want to put you in danger," she said. "You already have," he said. "And I'd choose it again." She looked up. "Why?" "Because I want you here," he said. "Not because I pity you. Not because I need to fix something. Because you belong here. You and those kids." Clara blinked, tears threatening. "I don't know what I can give you." "I'm not asking for anything," Eli said. "Except your word that if you stay, you stop running." Letty stood behind them, holding her baby brother, quiet and wide-eyed. Clara turned, looked at her children, then looked back at the door. Her hand hovered over the sack for a long moment. Then she let it go. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Tired of moving, tired of hiding, tired of pretending I don't want more." Eli stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Then stay." She nodded once, slowly, and just like that, the choice was made. That night, Eli stoked the fire while Clara fed her son on the rocking chair. Letty fell asleep, curled up beside them, her carved horse tucked beneath her arm. There were no guarantees, no wedding rings, no promises carved in stone, but Clara had chosen to stay, and Eli had chosen to stand beside her. And in a world as hard as theirs, that was everything. The sun hadn't fully risen when the dog growled again. This time, Eli was ready. He'd been sleeping light for days, boots by the door, rifle always within reach. One glance at the pale orange sky, and he knew trouble had returned. Clara stirred behind him as he stood, her hand immediately reaching for the baby beside her. Letty sat up on the pallet near the hearth, eyes wide, clutching her carved wooden horse. Eli pulled the curtain aside and looked out toward the ridge. 3 riders this time. Not just Rafe Mercer. 2 others flanked him, rough men with hard eyes, guns on their hips, and nothing good in their posture. Rafe rode in the middle, cocky as ever, reins loose in one hand, a shotgun across his lap. Clara came to Eli's side, her breath catching as she saw them. "He brought others," she whispered. Eli nodded, jaw tight. "They're not lawmen." "Just?" "Paid muscle." She stepped back instinctively. "He means to take me by force." Eli turned to her, eyes steady. "He's not taking anything." He opened the gun cabinet by the door. Inside was more than a rifle. There was a revolver, a box of shells, and a second rifle with a shorter barrel. Clara stared. "You've been preparing." "I told you I wouldn't let him take you." The riders stopped just beyond the gate. Dust curled around their horses' legs. Rafe dismounted with a smirk and called out, "Mornin'. Thought I'd save you the trouble of another warning." Eli stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, calm as a frozen lake. "You're trespassing." Rafe chuckled. "You gonna shoot me for that?" "If you take another step, yes." The 2 hired guns shifted in their saddles. One of them spit. The other scratched his beard and said, "Don't look like much of a fight, boss." Rafe raised his voice. "Clara, come out, sweetheart. We've got a wagon just for you and the boy." Inside, Clara's stomach turned, but she didn't back down. She reached for the second rifle. Her hands trembled, but she steadied them. She knew how to aim. Her father had taught her when she was just 12. "Let me stand with you," she said. Eli looked at her. "Sure, I won't hide." They stepped out onto the porch together. Rafe saw her and his smile faltered. "So that's how it is now? You think this broken-down cowboy can protect you?" Eli raised the rifle. "I already am." "I got paperwork," Rafe barked. "Proof she belongs to me." "You bring a preacher's words to a gunfight?" Eli asked. One of the hired men laughed. "I kinda like this guy." "Shut it," Rafe snapped. "You've got 5 seconds, Thompson. Step aside or this gets ugly." Eli's voice was quiet, deadly. "You're already outnumbered." Rafe frowned. "There's 3 of us." Eli gestured with the barrel of his rifle. "My neighbor's up the ridge with a scope trained on your back. He's been watching since sunrise." It was a lie, but he said it so calmly, so believably, that even Clara almost turned to look for movement in the hills. Rafe hesitated. "You think this is over?" He spat. "You think you can hide her forever?" Eli took 1 step forward. "I think you're a coward who buys what he can't earn and loses what he doesn't deserve." Rafe's hand twitched toward his shotgun, but Eli didn't wait. 1 shot cracked through the air, blowing a piece of wood from the post just inches from Rafe's leg. "Next one won't miss," Eli said flatly. The hired guns were already backing, their horses away, eyes wide. Rafe stood frozen for a moment, his pride clearly screaming louder than his sense. But then he looked at Eli, then Clara, and something in his expression broke. He cursed, turned, and swung up into his saddle. "Dust Hollow's got a short memory," he called. "You'll be sorry for crossing me." "Go," Eli growled, "and don't ever come back." They rode off in a storm of hooves and dust, the sound fading like a distant storm. Clara's knees gave out the moment they disappeared. Eli caught her. She didn't cry, not exactly, but something inside her uncoiled, something made of fear and tension, and years of running. She leaned into him, shaking, as he held her with 1 arm and kept his rifle steady with the other. "I didn't think I'd live to see him leave," she whispered. "You didn't just see it," he said gently. "You made it happen." She looked up at him. "How?" "Because you stood your ground." That night, the house was quiet again. But it wasn't the quiet of fear, it was the quiet of peace earned through fire and justice. It rained the next morning. Not the kind of storm that battered windows or flooded trails, just a soft, steady drizzle that smelled of new beginnings. The land drank it in, turning the dirt to a rich clay and leaving puddles that reflected the soft gray sky. Clara stood barefoot on the porch, watching the mist roll in from the hills. Her baby slept peacefully against her chest, bundled in a shawl Eli had given her the night before. Letty was inside with Eli, stirring something warm in a pot, laughing at one of his quiet, silly jokes. For the first time in months, Clara didn't feel like a shadow. She felt present, planted. Like she belonged. Eli joined her outside after a while, leaning against the post beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just listened to the rain, his shoulder brushing hers in quiet understanding. "You think he'll come back?" she asked. "Rafe?" Eli shook his head. "Not after what happened. He'll move on to the next poor soul he thinks he can break." She nodded. "Still, I keep expecting hoofbeats." Eli gave her a side glance. "You'll stop one day. Maybe not soon, but you will." Clara shifted the baby against her chest and looked out at the land acres of untamed soil, wind-blown trees and fencing they'd repaired together. "This place," she said quietly, "it doesn't feel borrowed anymore." "It isn't," Eli said. She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I went to town yesterday," he said, "after Rafe rode off. Made it official." She turned, heart thudding. "Made? What official? I put the deed in both our names." Clara stared at him. "Eli, I know you weren't ready for big promises," he said, voice steady. "Still ain't asking for anything you're not willing to give. But you deserve to belong to something. And something deserves to belong to you." Her eyes filled slowly with tears. "Not fear this time. Not sadness. Gratitude. Double quotes. You gave me land," she whispered. "No," he said. "We made it a home." Later that afternoon, Letty stood with a small stick in her hand, scratching something into the muddy edge of the garden bed. Clara leaned over, curious. "What are you writing, baby?" Letty smiled. "Our name, the baby's too." Clara knelt beside her. "You know how to spell it?" Letty frowned, concentrating. So on." Clara looked up at Eli, who had just stepped outside with a mug of cider. He froze for a moment, watching the scene before him, Letty carving their name into the earth, Clara beside her, the baby giggling as he tried to grab a wet clump of grass. A family. His family. Clara gave him a long look. "She wants your name." Eli stepped forward slowly. "And you?" She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Her eyes were clear, her chin lifted. "I already carry it," she said, "in the way I breathe now, in the way I sleep through the night." He swallowed hard, his voice quiet. "You sure?" Clara nodded. "I've run enough. If this land can hold my name, so can you." They never had a wedding with lace or preachers. No rings or witnesses. Just a Sunday morning with the sound of rain and the feel of a carved name in wet soil. That was enough. Eli built a new gate out front and hung a small wooden sign on it. He'd burned the letters himself. Thompson Homestead. All welcome. None owned. That evening they sat around the table, Letty beside Eli, helping him butter cornbread. Clara with the baby in her lap, humming a lullaby that finally didn't sound like a farewell. The fire crackled. The windows glowed. No hoofbeats came. No dust clouds. Only peace. It wasn't the end of hardship, but it was the beginning of something. Strong. Rooted. And finally theirs. The town of Dust Hollow was slow to change, but people remembered. Whispers spread quietly at first about the woman who once stood trembling beside a baby in her arms and a girl clinging to her skirts. About the cowboy who stepped between them and the man who tried to buy their silence. But soon, those whispers grew into nods of respect. Some folks tried to pry ask what really happened out at Thompson's ranch the day. Rafe Mercer came with guns in his hands and fury in his eyes. But Eli never spoke of it. Neither did Clara, because it wasn't a story about a gunfight. It was a story about a stand. Months passed. The land bloomed. Letty ran barefoot through fields that once held only dust and ghosts. The baby named Samuel. After Clara's father took his first steps under the open sky, laughing as he stumbled through the front door, chasing the family's old hound, Clara found peace in the smallest things: warm bread in the oven, a barn full of stacked wood, a man who reached for her hand in the middle of the night and didn't flinch when her scars woke her from sleep. There were still hard days. Rain that wouldn't stop, a horse that broke its leg, a memory that returned when she least expected it, but the fear no longer ruled her. It passed like weather now acknowledged, then left behind. One spring morning, Clara rode into Dust Hollow alone. She tied her horse to the post outside the general store, cradled Samuel against her hip, and stepped through the swinging door. Conversation dipped when she entered, then slowly resumed, respectful and steady. The store owner smiled. "Afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," Clara smiled back. "Afternoon, Ed." She bought sugar, flour, and a new pair of boots for Letty. Her feet had grown again. As Ed wrapped the items, a woman approached quietly from the back aisle, young, nervous, holding the hand of a boy who wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. "You're her, aren't you?" the woman asked softly. Clara tilted her head. "Who's her?" "The woman who didn't let him take her." Clara looked at the boy. His collar was too tight, and the woman's wrists had faint bruises beneath her sleeves. "I'm no one special," Clara said, "but you stood up to him." "I wasn't alone," she said gently. "And I was never his to begin with." The woman blinked, tears welling. Clara touched her arm. "We were never for sale." When Clara returned home that day, she found Eli and Letty sitting under the old sycamore by the pasture, reading from one of the dusty books she'd unpacked months ago. The baby squealed when he saw her and reached with both arms. Eli looked up, smiled quietly, and tipped his hat. "You bring back the good sugar?" he asked. Clara grinned. "And a message." Eli raised a brow. She looked at him, then toward the hills, then back at her little patch of dirt and sky. "People are watching," she said. "There's others like us, like I was." Eli nodded. "You thinking of leaving the porch?" "I'm thinking of building more rooms," she replied. By summer's end, the Thompson homestead had doubled in size. Not just in fences or crops, but in hearts. A young widow from 2 towns over arrived with her twin sons. A boy who'd run away from the mines came with blistered hands and the manners of a stray dog. An elder woman with no kin asked if she could simply sit by the fire and tell stories to children again. The ranch made room. Clara didn't ask for payment. Eli didn't ask for pasts. They simply made space. One evening, Letty curled up beside Clara on the porch swing. "Why did Rafe think he could buy us?" she asked. Clara brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Because some men don't understand that people aren't things." Letty frowned. "But why didn't we belong to anyone?" Clara smiled. "Because we belong to ourselves first." The sun dipped low, bathing the ranch in gold. Samuel toddled across the yard, chasing a butterfly. Eli stepped out with mugs of tea, handing one to Clara and ruffling Letty's hair. "No more running. No more silence. Just family held together not by ownership, but by choice. And that made all the difference."